of county canvassers of Utah County, Utah. And we have two agenda items. I think the second one will take a little bit longer time. The first agenda is approve the minutes from the July 12th, 2022 Board of Canvassers of Utah County, Utah meeting. I've gone through it. For me, it reflects everything that was presented and things I had followed up with. Some of the experts on this area. Do either of you have any comments on the meetings from July?
Nope.
No.
Have a motion then?
Move to approve the minutes
I'll
as stated
second.
number 1.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes 3-0. Number 2, sign the November 8, 2022 election certified report. As part of that, I'd like to have discussion between the commissioners and those that you would like to call as part of that conversation, you're welcome to do so. But as an initial part, let me review with some statistics I received from the clerk auditor, Mr. Daniels. We have roughly, well, we don't have roughly, we have 337,239 eligible registered voters. Of that, 206,900 votes or ballots counted. There were 115 poll workers. 609 votes were cast early. Election day in-person votes that were cast are 10,298 or 4.98%. Ballots not accepted, and these include those that were returned unsigned, signatures did not match the voter records, ballots returned from past election, empty envelopes, ballot only that arrived, and postmark were invalid. And that was roughly 3,307 ballots, or 1.6% of them. We have emergency provisional ballots counted 2,006, or 95.98% of those provisional ballots that came. Provisional ballots that were not accepted were 84, or 4.02% of them. Ballots replicated due to damaging. That's because the form was incomplete, no proof of residencies. Excuse me, that's a different topic, but 579 of those. And then ballots counted on or before Election Day, 142,432, or 68.84% of them. Ballots counted after Election Day, 59,519, that's 28.77%. And that's because they were postmarked on Election Day. Was that correct, Josh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Under the law,
Under law.
they have
So these
to
were
be
received
postmarked
after,
the
but they were
day
postmarked
before the election
Okay.
day. And anything that we receive that's not properly postmarked after Election Day can't be counted.
Okay. Ballots returned as undeliverable by the post office, 8,193, or 3.96% of them. Total ballots received by the postal system, 65,438, or 31.63%. Total ballots received from drop boxes, 130,953, or 63.29%. And these are the specific details are provided on the county website of total ballots cast.
And just to note, the informational statistics are just informational. That's not part of the official canvassing report per se. And in fact, they'll be updated slightly because we got our final result report, which you have, that will actually inform a few updates to that, because we prepared that earlier today from yesterday's results. But the final official results of the election are in the long form that you've got. Those are also posted on the website and uploaded to the state elections website. And as part of your official action, you will be signing a declaration that declares elected those persons in this report that are within the board's jurisdiction. So technically for Utah County, those are all the county races and any state races that are wholly contained within Utah County. So that will be the official report that you're adopting or signing. And I do have a few other informational items to share with you that are, I think, of particular public interest. There was one school board district in the county that got a lot of attention because of redistricting. They had to reconfigure school district boundaries, and that resulted in two current members of the school district board that ended up in the same district. So they actually had to run against each other. And given that they were both well known, it was a very, very close race. That was the Alpine School District 4 race. Sarah Beeson was the winner in a very close race over fellow board member Amber Bonner. And that race did not trigger a recount. Recounts are triggered anytime the final result is within 0.25%, which in that case would have been 60 votes. And that race was separated by only 52 votes, just under that threshold. In our experience in the past, when we have done recounts,
You got it flipped.
I got them flipped. Oh, yeah. So the threshold is 52, but the race was separated by 60. Yeah, so just beyond that threshold.
Eight votes.
And in our experience, when we've done recounts, which we've done about half a dozen over the course of the last few years under our existing system, it has never resulted in a change in the race. In fact, it's only ever resulted in a change of 1 or 2 votes, and that's typically because of the adjudication process, where somebody may have undervoted or overvoted or kind of scratched a name out. And when 2 election judges take a second look at it, they might have a different perspective on, the intent of the voter. But like I said, historically, that's only impacted 1 or 2 votes in a recount. So even if it was 52 votes, I think it wouldn't have changed the outcome if a recount would have been triggered. But I know that was a very closely watched race by folks. A little over 21,000 votes total were cast in that race. Some other interesting things about wait times. There's always interest in if there were long waits at the polls. We noticed that throughout Election Day, wait times ranged from very minor, like maybe 5 minutes or less, up to 25 minutes at peak times. It seemed to be steady kind of throughout the day. When we closed the polls at 8 p.m., the last voter checked in at 8 p.m. that was in line. So in terms of the end of the night, the longest wait was around 20 minutes after polls closed, which isn't too bad at all. The longest line we had was 36 people at Orem that were in line when the polls closed, and largely that was because of provisional voting, just a heavy student area, people who'd changed addresses or recently moved and were changing their registration there at the polls, and that just takes a little bit longer to process. We received 30,000 ballots from drop boxes in the final 2 hours of the election that came and were collected and then kind of brought into the office about 9 p.m. on election night. And so we were trying to figure out how long it would take to work through that after Election Day. And so when we tallied up all of the time to process ballots, we figured out that it takes about 54 man-hours to process 10,000 ballots.
When you say the ballots came in the last 2 hours, how did you detect that? Did you have workers nearby watching that?
No, so what happens is all throughout the day, we're going around and picking up ballots at the drop boxes.
Okay.
And so, but then we have a final locking of the box and bringing in of the ballots when the polls close at 8 p.m. But generally, we've been around to all the boxes by, between 4 or 5 p.m. We've emptied them all out at least once there in that kind of mid-afternoon time frame. And so then on top of having done that, we got an additional 30,000 ballots that were dropped off in boxes in those final hours that don't end up coming into the office until about 9 p.m. So as we're kind of finishing up for the night on election night, we then have 30,000 more ballots, which is about 15% of all the votes cast that will have to be processed in the coming days. And so we were trying to determine how much time that would take, and that's where we figured out it takes about 54 man-hours for 10,000 ballots. So for that amount of ballots, it was going to take over 150 man-hours, which calculated based on the number of people we had to be about 3 business days. So a lot of people were kind of scrutinizing and watching closely the results in Maricopa County, for example, and wondering why it takes so long. Well, it takes so long because those that drop off their ballot at the last minute, it takes time to process those ballots, right? It takes man-hours. But when we looked at the total throughout the election in terms of just processing received ballots, that 54 man hours for 10,000 ballots calculates out to just under 20 seconds per ballot. So if you think about the collective time spent through our process, some of which is automated, any given ballot that's returned in the mail or in a drop box is going to take just under 20 seconds to process. And then if you compare that to in person, you look at the total number of people that showed up to vote in person on election day and all of the poll workers that we have and the labor that goes in there, it's just under 8 minutes per voter for in person. And then we looked at that last day, to your question about those ballots coming in. As we collect ballots throughout the day on election day, we had about 75,000 votes or ballots submitted in that last 24 hours of election day. That includes the 30,000. So, when you look at it, this particular election, people seem to really, at least a lot of people seem to wait until the last minute to vote, whether that's showing up in person or dropping off their ballot kind of at the last minute. And, never quite sure what's going on there. Are voters just kind of taking their time and not wanting to forget, and they kind of wait to the last minute, or were voters more undecided, trying to decide on particular, races that they wanted to vote in or what have you? And it varies every year. And we looked at past years and tried to compare day over day over day, kind of how many ballots might come in as we're trying to predict and plan for our operation. And it's always just a little different every year based on voter behavior. So I just thought that would be kind of interesting for you guys to be aware of. And then I don't know if you had any specific questions about these results, about any of the official reports or anything like that. I do have another item to talk about, with the Board of Canvassers that we did. But any other questions, though, about those items, results, or anything like that?
No, I'm just remarkable with the work that you guys have to go through. So I appreciate that. And I did an audit. Me and my senior policy advisor did a couple audits, and so it was appreciated what you went through to accomplish this work is huge. But I would like to ask the commissioners to go ahead and have a discussion on what they saw.
I saw that you had 115 poll workers. Does that include the people working in the ballot center, or were those different? How many people did you have working in the ballot center, part-time and then full-time staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll turn it over to our election team if they've got a specific breakdown on that. We didn't have over 100 poll workers on election day. On election day, we had under 100 poll workers out in the field, but then we had additional in the ballot center. So if you're looking at a number that's over what was that number you
115?
said? Yeah, that would include people that worked on election day probably as our drop box closers and pickup teams and things like that.
Okay.
So Josh, I want you to talk about the ballots that were duplicated due to damage.
Yep.
We had quite a discussion, about that, which I think is enlightening, to have. And so if you could kind of talk about
Sure.
what happens with damaged ballots and the effort that goes into making sure that individuals who knows how they got damaged. I was
gonna say, do
the
we
one you
analyze?
told
Did
me,
you know how many were
had all kind of
boogers,
torn
how many
off
were
the edges
coffee?
and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I think that's interesting to know.
Yeah, great question. Let me start with a little historical note about ballot replication. One of the things that's really important about counting votes is that we want to make sure that the intent of the voter is preserved throughout the process. And generally, that comes in the result of the ballot submitted by the voter is the ballot that is counted. And if there's a question about the vote that was cast by the voter, then you have two election judges who look at the ballot or the image of the ballot to determine what the intent of the voter was, if that intent was clear. And so we hate the idea of having to sort of copy or reproduce a ballot in the event that it's damaged. In fact, in older systems of elections, when you would adjudicate, sometimes, and some jurisdictions still do this a little bit, although it's changing around the country, they would actually duplicate the ballot in order to do that adjudication process. Like if it was unclear on the ballot from the voter that was submitted, then they have to make a new ballot that reflects the intent of the voter and is duplicated. And that becomes problematic because that's a lot of work that has to go into it. And you have then, election judges that are sort of, in a sense, replicating that ballot. So we don't do that. We adjudicate in our system. We look at an image of the ballot. We tell the system if a vote is unclear, we tell the system what the vote should be based on the intent of the voter, and that's a much easier process. But there are some ballots that when we scan them on our optical scanners, they don't scan properly, and that could be that they're wet, and so they're sort of they've kind of been bent out of shape, and they don't scan. They could be cut. Sometimes voters will kind of draw on them through the timing marks, which are the barcode around the outside of the ballot that allows it to be scanned. And so there's a variety of things that might lead to a ballot not being able to be scanned the first time. So we have high-speed scanners that scan, 90% plus of the ballots. For those ballots that don't scan on the high-speed scanner, we have lower-speed scanners that will often scan the ballot just fine. But in the event that it doesn't, we have a few that get set aside that have to be reproduced. And that's where the 500 so come in. And in that process, 2 election judges take the original ballot and they look at the original ballot, and then they use our ballot marking device that would normally be used by voters at the polls, particularly those with a disability. It's an ADA compliant machine. And so that way on screen, they're able to select the choices from the original ballot submitted by the voter, and then print a duplicate ballot. They log all of that, they keep the original ballot, and then we scan that duplicate ballot that was unable to be scanned the first time around. That's the whole process end to end for ballot replication.
And so that machine, is that the DS200?
So the slower speed scanner is the DS200. The faster one is DS850. There's also a smaller version of DS450, but the DS200, we use those at the polls, and that's where a voter scans their own ballot.
Yeah.
And we also scan ballots in the office using that scanner. And then in terms of replication, what we're using there to mark that replicated ballot is what's called the express vote, which is it's a ballot marking system, and then it prints a card, and then those cards get scanned on the DS200 scanners.
Right. And so the handicap machine, though,
Yep.
What's that one?
That's called the express vote.
That's the express
Yep.
vote. Okay, I was impressed with that. I'm impressed with the amount of effort that goes into making sure that every legitimate vote is counted, and the amount of man hours that would go into a damaged ballot like that would have to, like you mentioned, sometimes they cut around the edges, they draw all over it.
Yep.
That's going to take a lot of time. So I'm impressed with those kind of things that are taking place. So thank you.
I understand the process pretty well, so I don't have a ton,
You have a
of
little
questions.
bit of experience in elections. That's
A
good.
little bit of experience in elections, so I don't have a ton of questions. I only entered the ballot center as a poll watcher because I am on the ballot this time. So I tried very hard to make sure that there was a separation. So I didn't actually come in and do much more than signing in as a poll watcher and watching only as a poll watcher because I wanted to make sure there was that separation as a person who was on the ballot. My policy advisor did go down and observe the audits multiple times, and any questions I had, I got answered. So I don't have, like I said, I don't have a ton of questions. I think seeing the statistics is very interesting to me, seeing how many people chose to vote on election day, how many people waited till the last 2 hours to turn their ballots into the drop boxes. Nice seeing that in a non-presidential year, we don't have to put everybody who's a poll worker on a W-2. That added a ton of time and cost, but that's what happens in presidential years because we have 3 elections, so definitely understand that. I was happy to see that my friend Senator Lee won by 26.56% in this county, so Utah County delivered for him.
Yeah, it was an interesting race where 2 Utah County residents were running for the U.S. Senate. Both Mike Lee and Evan McMullen, of course, live here in Utah County. They call Utah County home, and both of them voted here in this county. I know one of the candidates came and dropped their ballot off, and it was maybe the day before the election out in the drop box, and I'm sure the other one voted as well. I don't know when or where.
What I want to know is, did he wait till the day before because he was deciding who he was going to vote for?
Yeah, well, it's that is one feature that people like about vote by mail is they have the ballot in their possession for days that they can kind of review each race. A lot of times, I did notice at the polls, people would show up and they would be somewhat unfamiliar with all the different races that were on the ballot because you have like the judicial retention, and you have some propositions that people might not have been expecting, and so it is nice when voters have that ballot at home. They can go through each of those races, do some research, make their decisions, and then show up and drop their ballot off. Hopefully a little bit sooner than just the final 2 hours. That does create some traffic jams, which we have to deal with. Also, just wanted to thank each of you for your participation in the post-election audit process. And, I know all of you came in or sent a representative to be involved in that. And so we really appreciate that. That's an important part of the process. I know each of you have reviewed a variety of the materials and looked at ballots. We're part of that audit process, comparing votes in the system to the cast vote record and inspecting the ballots that were associated with each of those records. And of course, to follow up on previous conversations where there was talk about kind of looking more deeply at statistics and the election results and returns, we did some of that as part of the post-election process, a post-election verification, if you will, we discussed recently. So we analyzed and looked at data from the cast vote record, for example, and other kinds of data to sort of match things up and make sure that everything was correct and that there weren't any anomalies or issues. And I just want to express appreciation for all of your participation in that. We do have a couple of slides to show about where we kind of looked at some of those trends. So one of our constituents has a background in statistics and came on board as part of our election team. And so we were able to do this internal review as part of the Canvas process. So I'll show a couple of these slides. And what's interesting about this is it shows a progression of voter choice or voter behavior. So Cindy Butler, who's been here before, she joined our team this election to help us with this. And so what you're looking at, these little dots, each dot is a batch that has been tabulated. And in this particular case,
A batch being defined as?
A batch of ballots, about 250 ballots or so. Our batch size varies a little bit. We target it to be about 250, but sometimes if there's damaged ballots, they get set aside. They'll get scanned at a later time as part of a different batch. So each dot, and Cindy did a lot of really hard work on this, and it's really fantastic, the quick turnaround that she was able to do for us. But each one of these dots is the size of the batch, the total number of votes that were counted in that particular batch. And as you can see, most of the batches are similar in size. There could be some that are smaller, and I'll show you that in a second. So what we're looking at is just that one batch, each dot is one batch, and we're just looking in this case the outcome of the vote totals for one candidate or the other. In this case, it's the ratio of votes for Senator Mike Lee versus challenger Evan McMullen. And of course, as you pointed out, Commissioner Gardner, the total outcome in Utah County for Senator Lee was over 60%. So you can kind of see that dotted line is the trend or the average. So but any given batch is just going to have kind of a random selection of voters that voted. They might be more for or against a particular candidate. And all the gray dots were centrally tabulated batches, meaning these are vote by mail or drop box that we scanned here in the office. And then the colored dots at the end, Cindy did a good job to show you a legend up at the top, where those are batches that were scanned on site. So that's election day. So what you're looking at is sequence over time, and then you're looking at, based on where the dot is on the chart, what the outcome of the race was just for that handful of ballots. And then the color coding will show you which specific location on election day that batch was scanned at. So kind of what you're seeing, what's interesting is, you say, well, what does this chart tell me? Well, it tells you a couple of things. Number one, it tells you most of the votes that were counted were by mail or drop box, but then you have some election day at the end. It tells you that the election day voters seem to have had a slightly different preference than sort of all the other voters, which isn't surprising, right? Because I think there was a very politically focused effort for certain people to try to vote on election day. Generally, maybe more conservative or Republican voters sort of choosing specifically to vote on election day. And you can see that in this chart where those that chose to vote on election day seemed to favor Mike Lee more so than average across the county. That's not surprising to me. Looks like those that chose to vote at the Spanish Fork Senior Center, they liked Mike Lee even more than those that voted at American Fork Library or no, what was that? Provo, Provo Courthouse. So you'll see some of that too, where you'll see regionalization, where certain areas might be stronger for one party or one candidate than another. We definitely would see this in local races where if a candidate is from one side of town and the other candidate's from the other side of town, if you had polling locations or you could actually see which precincts voted for one or the other, there would be some differences, right? That's what you call self-selection bias. Okay, so this particular chart, this is just for votes for Mike Lee. Now, one thing to notice is the number of dots. There's a lot of dots, because every single batch that we scanned would include votes for Mike Lee. But that wouldn't always be true, because what we do is we sort our, before we tabulate batches of ballots, we sort our ballots sometimes based on district. So in particular, we'll separate ballots by congressional district before we tabulate them. That's so that in the end, when the ballots are stored, they're stored in boxes that generally align with congressional district, because if there was a very close congressional district and there was a recount, we would be able to narrow the number of boxes we have to open to conduct that recount. So when you look at the next chart, you'll notice, because the next chart is for the congressional race, there are fewer dots. And the reason there are fewer dots is because there are fewer batches for Representative John Curtis's reelection than for Senator Mike Lee, because that's only part of the county and because we separate those ballots ahead of time. But you'll see that the general trend of kind of, votes kind of across the spectrum there are kind of similar. And then you'll see at the end there, what this says is those that chose to vote in person maybe slightly favored John Curtis less than the average across the county. Now, what you'll see that's also interesting at that end of the chart is in this particular chart, you'll see that some of those colored dots are smaller. And what the reason for that is because, for example, the teal dot, that would be a batch of ballots submitted by voters who chose to vote in Saratoga Springs. Well, if you choose to vote in Saratoga Springs, chances are you're less likely to actually be a voter that resides in John Curtis's district, because that polling location is not in John Curtis's district. But all of our polling locations can service voters from anywhere in the county. So whether you're at work or at a family's house or staying with somebody, you can vote anywhere in Utah County, no matter where you live in Utah County. So those that live in John Curtis's district might generally vote in polling locations located in that district, but there could be voters that can vote in that particular race, but that choose to vote at a location outside of the district. And so that's why those dots are a little bit smaller. All right, any questions about these two charts? I've got two more interesting examples. We'll go to the third chart. Okay, so this is Alpine School District, which is most of the county, but not all of the county. Again, the Alpine School District bond did not pass. So what this is showing is this is
people
a
in
vote
Spanish Fork
against
liked it.
the bond. Well, that's an interesting thing I want to show. So if you zoom in there in the end, the dots that are small correspond to the Spanish Fork polling location.
Right.
And that's because people that generally are going to vote in Spanish Fork probably live in the Nebo School District. So there are fewer voters that live in Alpine that would have chosen to vote in Spanish Fork. And so certainly not a lot of Alpine District bond votes were going to be cast at polling locations significantly outside of the district area. But those that did certainly didn't like the bond more so than. But again, being for or against a bond could be a preference of a voter that's correlated with partisanship. And as I explained before, there was going to be a difference in partisanship for those that chose to vote on Election Day versus voting by mail or earlier, because it's more of a broad cross-section of everybody for vote by mail, and then it's more of a self-selected group of people that voted there at the end. Okay, and then there's one more chart. This is another proposition on the ballot. Okay, so one thing to notice here is there are a lot fewer dots than all the other charts, because these are the dots that correspond solely to batches that contained votes in the Orem School District proposal, which is just the city of Orem. So in terms of city of Orem votes, there's going to be fewer than countywide. So that's why there's fewer dots in this chart. And so this was for the proposal to create an Orem school district. And so, it didn't pass. And so, this is for the split. So for the split, the trend is around 30% were for the split, with 70% being against the split. If you go there to Election Day and you zoom in, you'll see that variation in dot size, because again, somebody who is able to vote in the Orem City question, largely they're going to live in Orem. So the big green dots are the polling location in Orem, and then the other colors are polling locations around the county. So an Orem voter could vote anywhere in the county, but generally those that voted on the Orem question probably voted at the Orem location because they live in Orem, and it might be more convenient to vote at the Orem location. So just some very interesting ways to kind of look at the data. And as Cindy described when she was here before, those lines for the statistical control chart are basically showing you kind of the range of variation. And so really the way to think about this is if there was some sort of shapes to these charts, it would probably have a lot to do with maybe, voters being there, because what we're looking at a chart of vote preference. This is how a voter chose to vote on a particular question or candidate. And those kinds of preferences are going to be correlated with other sorts of political demographics, partisanship, potentially region. And so you see some variation based on that. So, for example, you're seeing variation based on choosing to vote on Election Day versus not, and there could be some correlation with vote preferences. Certainly, there's a little bit there. So, I want to thank everyone who is part of this. And this is a little more robust than I think other counties can do. If you want more analysis, maybe as members of the Board of Canvassers, if you could just talk to your local county commissioner, request a little more budget for the elections team to have the bandwidth to do these kinds of things in the future.
Well, we need to include these slides as an agenda attachment, so submit that to Helene afterwards.
Okay.
And
Well, we have a whole bunch of slides. There's 50 of them.
Yeah, City made a lot of charts.
There's a
for
lot
us.
of charts
Succinct
every
like
race.
this.
But this is just four examples that I think kind of help show some interesting
And it can be in the
data.
record, of course.
Yeah. Should we invite Cindy to comment on this?
Sure. You bet.
We, Commissioner Lee had a BYU professor, UV professor who are focused on and professional statisticians came up and conferred with us and Cindy a month, 6 weeks ago,
Probably 6.
6 weeks ago.
At least 6, yeah.
So give your thoughts on this whole process.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for letting me participate in it. So both to Bill for championing the effort and Josh for deputizing me as part of the elections team and working with you. And it has been an intense 2 weeks, barely 2 weeks. And I know it's been super intense for you guys. I don't know how you do it. And it's been intense for me because I've been getting data updates every day. And no matter what Josh and Roseanne were able to send to me, I asked for more. And I ended up with a wealth of information, a wealth of data files, and spent full-time for the last 2 weeks, sometimes more than 8 hours a day, sometimes 12, sometimes not that much. But the first entire week was spent getting my arms around all of that data because there were so many variables associated with your process. And it's very expansive and difficult to understand how they all interrelate to each other. But you have to do that as a statistician so you don't get misled in your conclusions, and so you can construct the chart correctly and come up with the correct control limits. And I could talk for days about what I learned, but just wanted to simplify it.
I totally understand. I was there 4 years ago.
Yeah. And so the thing that I was most interested in personally is the idea that so many people mistrust our elections. And so the public across the country has been hammering for give us more data, let us see more data. How can we verify the data that you're showing us? We put our ballots in a black box, and we don't know what's really going on behind the scenes. And so that was my personal goal, was to help understand myself what's going on. And I can see it by looking at the data through the election process. And that's what I wanted to show. And you may have seen some of my charts before where you saw a big split kind of like that one, only the big split happened during the early in-person voting and then the rest of the chart. And so it looks like there was ballot stuffing happening in New Mexico. And I don't see that here. And another thing I saw in another county was a linear trend going on, which means it was so big and so blatant that it indicated data manipulation using an algorithm to put a trend in to get your votes to come out the way you wanted. And I didn't see that here either. So in just a few minutes, everybody can see the plot's pretty much flat. Yeah, there's a little trend up there, but there's a rational explanation for that. And the rational explanation is that people who voted in this race in person felt differently than people who didn't. Or it could have been that everybody there stuffed ballots. But if you look at all the other races, which I did, that didn't happen in all the other races. So it looks to me more like that there's a more, the people who voted on election day did so on purpose because of everything that's been happening in the elections throughout this year. And people who are informed all decided to vote on election day, which is why you got slammed with all of that work. And it turns out, to me, my interpretation is they have a different, people who wanted to wait and vote in person have a different feeling in their preference. So I guess I could say one other thing about the chart. Can you see the little blip right in the middle there? It's just a little teeny tiny, maybe you can blow that up for us. Yep, that blip. See that blip? That's actually where those colored points should go. Does that make sense? Because you processed a whole bunch of things before the election, and then you had election day, and then you processed a whole bunch of things that were from Dropbox. And then, but I just didn't have enough time to get the colored dots in the middle. And I thought this meeting was tomorrow, or I would have had a few more slides for you. But I think that's about it. I'm satisfied that I can't see anything here that worries me for this election. But I really, really love the fact that we had a champion that allowed us and helped us and worked through the system to be able to work with Josh, who championed it and worked with me, gave us the data, allowed us to look at it so that we could all present it to you, the public, who wants to know what's going on inside that box, inside that black box. Is there anything else?
So, Cindy, I just want to publicly thank you. Like she said, she spent countless hours, who knows how many hours. She is a professional statistician, and she did this voluntarily, which equates to probably a lot of money too, that she did not do her work in being able to present this. And I am so glad to see it, to see the results of it. I know during this process we had a lot of conversation back and forth, which I'll get to. I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about what I saw through the process as well, and it just gives me comfort to say and to know that we're doing something different besides just the normal. Let's just count it, because the the confidence level is low. And when we were down at UAC, we even had protesters that were protesting down there on this issue. And they were trying to call me, and they wanted to meet, and I talked with their commissioners. And so this is great, and I love the fact that we've gone through this process way different than any place else in the state of Utah. I know that because I visited with almost all the county commissioners, down there in St. George talking about it, and they looked at me like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it's fun to see us lead out with it. I would hope that this would, start a process of conversation and dialogue into the future.
We have 200 plots. I don't know where you want to put them or what you want to do with them, but I guess you could figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, it will allow for a conversation. Maybe the state legislature, I know that there are county commissioners for the first time who, wanted to go see the information that is duly afforded to them. They didn't even know that they had that right to ask, and in some cases they were told they couldn't see it. So I applaud your efforts in this whole process. Thank you.
And for my part, I see we have a lot of integrity in our staff, and it's a matter of complying with law, as we had talked about weeks before. This is a brand new issue. It had not technically ever existed until the hanging chads, you might remember, 22 years ago. That was the first time that I was aware of publicly noticed problems. But this has never really been an issue until just the last handful of years, over the last two administrations, and questions are wondering why on both sides of the aisle. And so that has caused this to come to this junction. And so all of us were scrambling to getting results. And so I wanted to thank the leads on all this, Commissioner Lee, Josh Daniels, Cindy, and Roseanne, for your staff. And Cindy has been doing this kind of work throughout this country, actually, for some time. Someone has shared a link of her presenting similar materials in another state at one point. So I think this information is crucial. And so I would like that this summary, and then if you could provide a summary, Cindy, of your findings on top of these slides that we could add to the agenda, and that way the public can read it when they can by getting into the county website. So maybe you could work that with Josh, and we don't need 50 or more slides. We just need what's the most salient points would be useful.
So I did a very non-scientific, because I was on the ballot, so I didn't want to meddle too much. But what I did do is every time I passed a drop box, I waved at the camera to see if anyone would notice. And I want to give a shout out to Tony in the back, because he would notice whenever I did, which means that somebody was watching the cameras. I just wanted to see if somebody was watching the cameras. So when I walked by, I would wave, and then Tony would be like, "Hey, next time flash me a sign." And I was like, "I don't know any gang signs. I'm from Provo. I don't know what to tell you." But anyway, so my very non-scientific study did show that there were people watching the cameras.
Are you finished with your presentation?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
We have public comments as last.
Commissioner, if I could.
Yes.
I would like to go through what I have learned, observed, and seen, and kind of a process of how we got to this point. So obviously, from the primary election, in which I was upset with, not being able to get the information that I felt and then found out and knew was should have been afforded to me, even to the point to where, we were people were saying there's no such thing as CVRs, or, there's no CVR data, all that kind of stuff is going on. Just the level of events that have happened from there to here is quite amazing as we worked through this process. And and I'm not trying to place blame. I think a lot of times we have to live in the boxes that are afforded to us, or what we know, or what we're told. And so it does take a process of time. But from that point, knowing that I was going to be involved in this process, there was no doubt about it. I mean, everyone knew that. Going through and having discussion, we actually had an RFP out there. Then we found out that couldn't happen after the Board of Canvassers is over with. That election materials gets preserved, and we had discussions about what preservation looks like, even from the physical to the on your computer. And I think that will continue to kind of move around as conversations happen. And then, my fellow commissioners challenged me and said, well, we don't know anything about Cindy. And you know what? I just met Cindy at the beginning of this. I didn't know Cindy either. So it was, and everyone was trying to make these ties of some sort of conspiracy with this thing. But my fellow commissioners challenged me and said, let's see if we can reach out. So we reached out, and Commissioner Sakovich, myself, and Amelia, I can't remember, you were secretary. I can't remember now. I shouldn't say that. Laura was there, and Josh was there, and we had quite a discussion with the two professors, the doctors of statistics from BYU and UVU, and we went back and forth, on. And one thing was for sure, and that is that there is no golden egg to this thing. It's not one report that's going to solve all of it. Somebody will look at these things, and probably in the next week or so, I'll get some emails that'll say, I still don't believe a word that's going on. I can almost guarantee that's going to happen. But I think the process that we're trying to go through, it lends for more transparency and opportunity for us to have discussion. And it gives us as commissioners the opportunity to do our due diligence and do our job as commissioners when it comes to as a member of the Board of Canvassers. So like was mentioned, we had an opportunity last week to go down to UAC, which is the Utah Association of Counties, in which all the commissioners are down there. Almost all the county elected officials are down there as well, and have discussions. And this came up. And sometimes we live myopically in our own little worlds and we don't see things around us. But down there, I found out that down in Iron County, most of the people in Iron County never even received a ballot. And so they were scrambling, trying to get their elections done because their ballots went out of state. And when they went out of state, they got mingled with other things. And who knows where they're at. They're probably doing an investigation and find out what happened. But they were scrambling, and there was a little bit of mix-up, too, in Carbon County on some vendors. I think they had the same vendors. And so, there's issues going on, in different parts of the state, way different than ours. And we, as commissioners, had a conversation in which I had an opportunity to present to them with the Iron County Commissioner and talk about what you can see. Josh was there as well. Another clerk auditor from Davis County was there.
And we don't use that vendor, right?
We don't use that vendor.
Just clarifying, we don't use that vendor.
Yeah, we don't use that vendor. Yeah, good point. And so for the first time, I think a lot of the county commissioners around the state were looking like, you mean I can see this information and I can go through it and I can analyze it? In which a week before I had some emails from council members, commissioners that were asking and saying, well, they're telling us we can't see it, which was kind of where I was back in the primary, right? So this is the process. I think everyone down there that went to the conference realizes that the elections are important all the way through, and the process is important too, and that check and balance. And so I want to reiterate how important elections are. They make a difference, and sometimes one vote makes a difference, and it does steer the ship, of the state or of the county or of the city or of the nation in certain directions. I heard one of the county clerks say, we have got to get the elections right. We got to make sure they're right, and so every effort that we put towards that is always commendable. And so I'm thankful for that. I want to thank the election workers and those that were heavily involved with this. It's to me it's like a miracle that you can even get this done. I mean, when you talk about 207 ballots, or you're throwing out 330,000 ballots out there, and you're wondering if it's going to come back and how it's going to come back, and it's going to come back ripped up, torn up, whatever, and then you have to kind of go through the process. It amazes me. And then to see the operation that you have downstairs and trying to go through that counting process. So thank you for the work that you do under pretty stressful circumstances and situations, but I think as I mentioned with others, like in mental health, I said you should stand up as first responders because you respond first in a lot of cases to some of the cases that are coming through. In the way of freedom, individuals that stand up for freedom, you're right on that front line defending that. And so again, thank you for that. Now I'm going to go through some things, and I hope that you don't take this. There are things that I noticed that I want to point out, because as a member of the Board of Canvassers, I looked at things and said, I don't know. I'm not saying they're wrong, and I'm not saying that through an election, but there are things that I think that we probably ought to look at and consider as we're going forward. One of them was precincts. Back in February, we voted as a legislative body, which is our responsibility to organize and put precincts into place. 473 were put into place in February, in which we voted on. The clerk's office, they're not in charge of it. They're just helping the commissioners in this case put it together, which they have the tools to do so. They put it into place. And as Cindy was doing her analysis, she sent me a text and says, how come in August we have 542? I said, I don't know. I'll ask the question. So I asked the question. It came back that there was some splits in precincts that were needed and necessary to happen, which I applaud, because we had areas within a precinct in which if you send ballots out for that precinct, some of those areas they'd be voting improperly because it crossed lines, because there was a lot of overlap in the boundaries coming from the state. So I applaud the precinct splits. The one area of just caution and warning is that should be a legislative action, should have came back to the commissioners for an amendment so that we could amend those precincts. Again, I think it was wise to do so we get the right ballots going to the right people in the right precincts, but it did increase. Second, I got a text message or a message that said, what happened to the CVRs are missing in 1, 2, 3, 6, 68,247, 68,248, 119,000, and it goes, there was a bunch of CVRs missing. Now, to just look at that on a face value without an explanation, you think, what's going on? What's happening? How come those are missing? Which is a natural reaction. But after a conversation with Roseanne and with Josh and talking about that, there's a logical explanation of how sometimes they need to be skipped because of a machine, or they need to be skipped at the beginning to start the process right. And so I went through there and I listened to it and I said, that makes total sense to me. There was one that came back and says, why was batch T0247 missing all together? It's just gone. It's not there. There's an explanation for it again. And again, if you look at it just on the face value, you'd say, what happened? Was there something that was going on mischievously? What happened was the count was off. They recognized it, realized it, and instead of trying to do something inside of that, they just said, it's easier and cleaner just to delete. Hopefully I'm saying it right, Roseanne. Just to delete that batch. Just delete that batch, start over. Let's just move it off into a different area and make sure and get it counted properly. There was questions about, were the CVR numbers randomized or reordered? And there's always an explanation of why, we go through the processes we do. Now, there was an incident that happened that, I should say this. There were 5 ballots that were processed on September 24th, and the question was, how did that happen? That seems way early. why we get 5 ballots. Well, it turns out through the conversation again that when we're talking about overseas, ballots, sometimes we'll send out emails. Sometimes we're doing it through the Votes app. I don't know if this one was a Votes app or not, or maybe it was. But either way, there's a 45 window opportunity. They sent that out. They actually received it on the 23rd, so it totally made sense that those individuals probably voted on the 24th. It lined up in that period of time. But again, without knowing that or without having that conversation on a transparency basis, you would throw some sort of questions into there. So if you would put this, Josh and I had this conversation. Josh will recognize this because he's the one that drew it up. So this diagram, the question comes up, which is one that I heard over and over and over and over, and that is, are the polling pads connected to the main server? And if they're connected to the main server, then they can be hacked because you can backdoor your way into the main server. So I asked Josh that question. Now, he would do a much better job of trying to explain it. I will try. So if you go to the left side, you'll see down there 3 little items down there, and those were polling pads. Now, they have polling pads at the voting locations, and they have a lot of them. I don't know how many, but they have a lot of polling pads. And on those polling pads, they have information, which is the voter information. So if you go to a polling pad and say, hey, I'm Bill Lee from, I show my driver's license from Pleasant Grove, they can look it up and say, yes, you're a registered voter. We have it in here. So all the registered voting is in there so they can see it. It goes, my question was, how does it, where does it go? It went way further than I ever imagined. So he went down through it in typical Josh fashion. And he drew out there the cell, the Wi-Fi, the Verizon. It goes on. And it goes on. And he put this nice little cell tower on there, the internet, and then it goes up to this data exchange. And we talked about, and I don't get it all, but there's this no ink, the data exchange stuff, and there's the Capitol on there right there. And then it goes over into this Vista. And now he talked about the servers at the Capitol being super secure. They go through a lot of processes to make sure that they keep this data, private. And then it goes to this Vista over here in which the county interacts with. And we have computers that interact with the Vista so we can see what's going on. So as they get updated, they'll go through this process, come back, and all these poll pads are able to be updated. And as they're updated, then we don't have somebody going and voting in Spanish Fork and somebody going up into Lehigh or whatever the case is. We'll have current, that current applications there. That line right there that you see on the right-hand side, think of that as a wall. That's put up. That line then we don't cross this information over into the other side. So when you see what kind of looks like a computer in there, that's the main server. And the main server is where we house a lot of the results, the data, and we'll get that. I can't remember what those 2 little squares were below, Josh. Remind me what those were.
Just kind of representing the terminals or the scanners, if you will, that we use in the tabulation center.
For counting.
Just the idea that counting the votes is that sort of self-contained collection of things that's not connected to the internet or to the voter registration information. Yeah.
So it's totally on the other side, which I had this question come up so many times, and I'd never known. Now you know. So now you're armed with it. The poll pads and so forth are disconnected from it. The computers that are on that side are disconnected from it. They don't talk back and forth, because if they did, then would breach that line. So
there's even one more line here that I think Josh forgot to draw for you, and that is between Vista and the DTS that NoInk speaks to. That's a one-way. There's actually a mirrored database. So NoInk cannot access the Vista database. The Vista database, the only people that can access that are people that have direct links from the county to the state's Vista database. Vista actually creates a mirror database that the NoInk portal reads into, so that NoInk is never actually accessing the voter records. They're only accessing the mirrored database that has a one-way portal, so that even the people at the polling locations couldn't rewrite election voter list data.
I like your terminology better of mirrored. It's actually on here. It's up here. It's called shadow database, but
Yeah, it's
but
a
Josh
mirrored
and I crossed that
database.
out because we said, if we put shadow on there, people are going to get nervous.
It's a mirrored
so mirrors
database.
better, but it's actually on there.
Okay.
I just didn't go through that.
But it is
that
important to
conversation.
realize that the iPads at the polling locations cannot change voter data.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you know. Now you know what that is, and if people ask questions, you can confidently talk about what's going on there. So that's some more information that I learned, which I never would have learned if I just would have shown up at this meeting and then voted. I went through that process, asking the questions and asking all these questions as they're coming up. Now, an issue came up, which is still troubling to me, but I'm going to express it to be as transparent as possible. During the process, I received an email from some individuals, and you'd imagine they know that I'm going to be looking, right? So what do? I get conversation. People say, "What about this? What about that?" I had a group of people who said, "I don't think my vote's being counted. I look on the tracking and I can't find anywhere where it's tracking my vote." And so they called me. I went down there and looked it up and said, "Oh, actually your votes got counted. But because you voted in person, it's different. You can't see it. If you do it, by mail or whatever, it goes through the state's process. In person's a different process." And a couple of them said, "Well, I voted by mail and I still can't see it." And it turns out that maybe they were protected. They're not seen. They're not seen the same way. So I did do that, but there was one where they came to me and said, we have a household of 5, a father, a mother, or 4. And they live in the same household, and they got different ballots. And so I said, well, that seems problematic. So we went through the process. I let Roseanne know that there was ballots like that. From my understanding and talking with her, she needed more information because she couldn't see what precincts were on there. And after she got more information, they were able to go pull those ballots still in the envelopes off the line from being counted. And then to try to find out what was going on. So the wife was in the right precinct, but the husband and the children were not. They were in different precincts, and yet they're in the same house, which is problematic, right? So they were actually on the border of a district, and so somehow GIS did a cut through there and separated them. If they would all been on one precinct or the other, we probably would have never seen this. But because there was that split and there was asking questions, and I think asking questions is a good thing, not a bad thing. I want to reiterate that. Asking questions is a good thing. They asked the question, and we started looking at it. And from my understanding, the husband was able to revote or cure his or do something different, vote in person or vote, But the two children said they didn't have time. They're going off to college. And so they weren't able to cure theirs or do something different. The concern is that those 2 votes were still counted. I think that's problematic because if we know that those ballots are not right, we should spoil them. And I think maybe that's a training issue where we just say, if we know we should just spoil them and say don't, because if it come down to 1 or 2 votes, and we don't know at that point, then that needs to be taken care of and spoiled so that it doesn't throw an election funny one way or the other. That's just one thing I learned as I was going through the process. So talking about the signature process and verification, it's eye-opening, to me to see what goes on. I was told, and my numbers may be wrong, but the Agilis machine kicks out quite a few signatures. I don't know if it was 50, 60%, or maybe they get 50 or 60% right. That's what it is. So there's about 40%. So if you think about it, you've got 207,000 ballots that are running through a machine, and about 40% of those get kicked out because they're not, and I just put it exact matches. In my name, I've got a William C. Lee, and let's just say I signed it William Lee. It may kick it out because it doesn't, recognize the C and says, nope, it's not an exact match, so it kicks it out. Then from there, it goes to eyes on, and there are two individuals who are looking at it. And as they look at it, they can maybe say, oh, well, obviously William Lee, William C., so we're going to move it on as being counted. And then if they look at it and say problematic, then they can take it and kick it to some more eyes, and these eyes are merited employees, right? They have more information. They can go look at the past election. They can go look at driver's licenses. They have more information to check and see if it's going down that process right, and so then from there they'll say, yeah, it looks good or not. And if it looks good, they allow it to move on. If not, then it goes into a group of ballots that need to be cured, and that's the fourth step. The ballots need to be cured. We did, as I did my spot check, find an interesting situation where it appeared like the wife signed the ballot, and she signed the ballot even in the primary, and then for some reason the ballot or the signature for the husband got uploaded to the to this election as the signature. And so when you go back and look at the past election and say, well, that was the signature, it crosses over. And I think we all acknowledge that was probably a mistake that happened. It's just, something that happens. It doesn't change elections or anything like that. But there's, little things that we probably need to shore up as we're looking at especially signatures. And I know there's varying degrees on signature verification, what people think and how they're verified or not. Lastly, on the curing ballots, that batch after the first, the second, the third, and we're on the fourth now. There's quite a bit. There was about 2,300 or so the day I went down there. As you see on the list that's coming out now, there's about 1,775 left over, so they did quite a bit of work on there. I do have a concern, and it's one when we're curing ballots. Everyone that does not their vote is not cast, we send them a letter, and so everyone gets a letter. And if we have an email for them, either they wrote it on the back or we have it in file, they may get an email or multiple emails to come in and cure that ballot. My concern comes in with a phone number that we list on the back, or maybe we have it in the system as well. And if we've got numbers on the back, it doesn't mean that we necessarily go through the process of trying to cure that or call them. Some of the times that does happen because there might be discrepancies where they think, oh, it looks like a husband and wife signed the wrong ballots, and so they want to cure it that way, and a phone call happens. But I went down there this morning, and this morning is after the deadline for curing ballots, which was 5 o'clock yesterday, and there was still 908 ballots that had phone numbers on them. Some of them might have been called. I'm not sure, but I did ask the question, you're sure everyone got a mail piece? Yes. You're sure everyone got an email or multiple emails? Yes. And I said, are you sure that everyone that had listed as a reference down there to call them if there was a problem, did you call them? And, and they said no. So for me, it bothers me. It bothers me just because I think we should be doing the gold standard. I don't want to be that county, right? That county that you don't, every legitimate vote may not have been counted or cured, or at least the opportunity. And so for me, that's concerning. We've had discussion about that. And actually the conversation came up, well, we need more staff, or we need robocalls, or we need, to do different things with it. In talking with Paul, it's a time issue, and if it's time, then are we willing to say, if the commissioners agree and the clerk agrees, let's give it a couple days and postpone this a couple days so that we can get the gold standard and call all these?
State law
These-
says it has to be 14 days.
State law does say that,
Yeah.
but it also gives us
'Cause
some
it shall
opportunity.
be, it says it shall
to-
be canvassed within 14 days. You can do it sooner, but not later. So it says it shall be canvassed within 14 days. So I think, so we can,
We've gone over this back and forth, and in looking at it, I think if we have, we could argue that we've received, but we haven't actually had an opportunity to, to count all the legitimate votes that are out there. What if? I'm willing to certify the election. Let me just throw that out there. I'm willing to certify it.
I think it is a valid question.
I would like to certify it as the gold standard, not the silver standard, the gold standard, where we have done over and above. Now that the election's done, there's not as much information going on. If we just said, hey, let's just call and give them the opportunity.
Well, there are services that we could hire. There are softwares that we could get, that we could have somebody enter all of those phone numbers into the voter records. We could enter that into a database and we could pay those services. In fact, the Text to Cure platform could do robocalls for us. I mean, there are things we could do in the future to make this better. And there are services out there that we could do that could make those phone calls for us. So I think it's a valid point. Absolutely. We'd have to find a vendor, contract with the vendor, and utilize the service. Right. For the future. Right. No, I understand.
Well,
Rosanna.
I'm not convinced that we can't do it for this election. But-
Yeah.
State certifies next week, and we have to have our results
Right.
tomorrow,
But
And the state certifies what day?
a week from today,
So
Yeah.
the 28th.
and you've got a holiday.
Right.
If it's any consolation, we did reach out to those candidates that were in a very close race, and we explained to them that there were these cures, and we gave them the list of those voters whose ballot needed to be cured, and said, if you want to do additional follow up, different counties have different kinds of ways that they go about making that list available to interested parties, like campaigns and political parties and stuff like that. We've generally been more on the side of sharing when asked, and kind of making that available for those, because they can kind of do some of that follow up too. Because we try to contact these voters 3-4 different ways. I can say that every one of those signature discrepancies were contacted at least 3 times. That could have been 2 letters and an email, 2 emails and a letter. Most, if not all, received at least 2 letters in the mail. And, for those who had email addresses, 1 or 2, even 3 emails. But I totally agree. I mean, it'd be great to also get a phone call to everybody as well.
Our deadline to cure was yesterday, so we can't continue to.
Yeah, just legally, they had to get back to us by yesterday. And I have talked to some voters who have in the past been on that list of, not matching signatures. And I've kind of done my own little study of 3 or 4 conversations to say, well, why didn't you respond? And they were like, well, it was after Election Day, so I figured it didn't matter. And that's a misnomer that, it's common misconception, I think, among people in the public that after Election Day, everything's over. Well, that's not exactly true, right? Because we're still reconciling and counting provisional ballots, and these signature cures are another example where, people can make their vote count if for some reason it got set aside during the process. They have until, yesterday. So I think it's a great point that you make, and there's always room for improvement.
So, Paul?
Yeah, just to comment on that, Paul Jones from the Attorney's Office. My comment with Commissioner Lee was that there are 2 very narrow grounds to where the Board of Canvassers may have the opportunity to continue the meeting. And the first one is if the election officer has not received all of the election returns, then the Board of Canvass may be continued. But in this case, I don't think there's any question that we have all the returns. The other scenario, which I think might be kind of what Commissioner Lee is referring to, is if it clearly appears to the election officer and to the Board of Canvassers that certain matters are omitted or that clerical mistakes exist in the election returns, then the election officer shall correct the omissions and mistakes, and that the clerk and the board together can agree to adjourn from day to day to await receipt of the corrected mistakes. And I don't think that exists in this case. I don't think there's clerical mistakes or omissions here, but that if the board feels that way, along with the election officer, those omissions or mistakes, the board can continue just so long as to correct those mistakes or those omissions.
And so that's the one area that I, in omissions, meaning in this case, that the voter intent down there was, it was written out that if it doesn't match, here's the ways in which you can go through a curing process, or which maybe the county will use to cure this process. And then we admitted that we didn't use one of those processes fully. And so for me, it's, again, we have no fraud in this thing. It's just I can't tell you how many times somebody comes up to me and says, I don't even know if my vote even counts. I don't know if it counts at all. I don't know if it does. What's the use? Why would we do this? I think it would send a strong signal to the voters to say, we want to certify this election, and we want to certify this election at the highest standard that we possibly can do. And so that's the reason why I bring it up. But again, I realize it would have to be the commissioners, or probably in this case, majority of the commission, along with the election officer, which is Josh Daniels, that says, yes, let's do this. Otherwise, it doesn't go forward. It's not one or the other. It's not a vote from one or the other. So I'm just asking, is there any appetite for that?
I mean, I just don't think there's anything we can do, because legally they have to cure by yesterday. The legislature kind of addressed this issue, and there was a pretty robust discussion in the legislature about what would be the required sort of minimum standard for contacting voters about the signature issue. And, so some people were like, oh, you have to do all three: email, letter, phone call. Some were like, you have to do one of the three. They settled on one of the three. I know some counties, probably fall below where we do. We've worked with IT to create a system where we send them a data file every day, and they generate an automatic email to everybody for whom we have that email address. And so, we did that throughout the process, and then we sent at least 2 letters. Depending on when it came to our attention, they may have gotten 2 or 3 letters, or maybe just 1 letter if they were towards the end. But I think it's a great point. It's a good discussion. It's definitely room for improvement. We could, create some other, maybe contract some services or get more people to make phone calls. It's certainly a bandwidth and sort of staffing issue with, the work that it takes to go through and make those calls. But I don't know that there's a specific thing that can be corrected, because legally the voter has to have returned an affidavit by yesterday. So there's nothing we can do at this point for those additional ones where people haven't responded. One thing to think about is that these are voters who received a ballot in the mail, and then they sent the ballot back to us, either through the mail or a Dropbox. So we responded to them through that same medium, through the mail, with a letter. And many people use our text to cure platform, where they can basically communicate to us mobily, and they will cure sometimes within minutes of getting the email from us, or within a day of getting the letter. So it's always curious to me, the people that don't respond. We sent you a ballot in the mail, you filled it out by hand, you wrote on it by hand, you signed it or didn't sign it, or it didn't match, you sent it back. We sent you a letter, you didn't respond. It's just, I don't know. I'd love to know why we didn't get better response from those, right?
And yet we cured 400 yesterday.
Yeah. Yep. Which is good. It shows that that they knew there was a deadline, because we weren't getting 400 a day. We'd had about 2,000 since the end of election day, and any given day we might get 50 here, 50 there. So to get 400 on the deadline shows you that people got the notice, and some of them were like kind of urgent about it because they knew there was a deadline. And I think some of them just think it doesn't matter. They've already looked at the results. They don't think it'll change.
Right.
So, but
So I hear you. So that ends that discussion. And maybe just in final, again, there's a lot of thank yous for this. I think that it does give us an opportunity. I think Utah County has let out when it comes to this election and what we can do, and shown the rest of the state of what probably should happen. My hope is that these conversations go on to the state legislature. Paul and I were laughing the other night about looking at the election code and how it says in there that if you don't get these, if your precinct doesn't send you this, basically it doesn't say this, but it's close to it. You have to send a carrier pigeon, over there with the judge's note to get them back. That's how archaic some of this stuff is, and I'm really being facetious with it, but still it's pretty close. And so the hope is that our legislature will go through this process this next year and work it. And just my personal preference, which I want to say as a matter of record for the Board of Canvassers, last one for me, is that I really think that we should not be afraid to change a course if we are getting a lot of upheaval with it. And if we need to go back to a hybrid system where it's in person mainly, and then it's by mail only upon request, I would love to have that kind of conversation, or make it so that the local jurisdictions can make that determination based off of what they see and what they're feeling from their constituents, because we can't afford to lose the election process. It will destroy our constitutional republic on any. And so that's the reason why I was willing to stand out there and even get beat up by the Boba Fetts of media who like to just headhunt constantly, because it's worth it. It's worth it that we have these conversations and ask these questions and look at what has happened since we've had these conversations over a period of time, and I hope they continue. So thank you. I am willing to certify, and I will certify gladly. There has not been fraud in this. There has not been manipulation in here. There's little minor issues that go on that I think that can be corrected here and there, but I don't see anything in this election process that I have now. And as a member of the Board of Canvassers, this is the first time that I can confidently say that and say I've done my due diligence as a member of the Board of Canvassers in looking at these, looking at elections and making them not just secure, but also bringing confidence to the people.
I just want to give a shout out to our amazing election workers. I know we have grandmothers who missed grandchildren's birthdays because they were here opening ballots and counting. I know we've got mothers that missed time away from their children. I know we've got fathers that missed their wives and their children. I know we've got incredibly hardworking people. I think it's important to remember always that your elections are not run by some nameless, faceless group of people in a state capital or a nation's capital. They're run by our neighbors. They're run locally. All elections in this country are local. That's by design. Your local official here in Utah is elected. They live in our county, and the majority of our workers live in our county. They all live in our state, and they are our neighbors. They are good, hardworking people. And I think that as tensions have gotten high around elections, nationwide, we've lost 1/3 of the election professionals in this country. 1/3 of the election professionals in this country, because they've been treated poorly by people who think that they're nameless, faceless people. And so I want to make sure that we give a shout out. And I know both of you mentioned this, and I appreciate that. But we have amazing, hardworking people in our county. They live amongst us. They're our friends, our neighbors, their mothers, grandmothers, fathers, uncles, Relief Society presidents even. And they put their heart and soul into their work. And I appreciate every single one of them. So thank you for your hard work and everything that you do for not only us, but for every person who lives in this county, because all of them are affected by the work you do. So thank you.
Okay. I think we can go on. Is there a motion?
I'll Well, I'll make a motion that we certify the election report as presented to us.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes 3-0. Are there any public comments? I'll pretend I know your name, Vince. We'll keep them all to 2 minutes if anyone else would like to speak. So, and Holleen, see if there's anyone online.
Yes, Vince Newmeyer, and thanks for the opportunity to comment. And I'd like to thank Josh and Roseanne and Justin. I went down there as a poll watcher, and I peppered them with questions. I wanted to understand the system inside and out, and they were very accommodating, and thank you so much for that. And what I saw was really good. People were conscientious. They wanted to get things right. I really appreciate that, and I appreciated their effort to help me understand the system. So thanks for all those things. And I went down there and I looked and, sniffed around a little bit to see if there was communications of the election server out on the internet. And so far, I don't see anything. It looks good. But I'm not saying that, well, let me put it this way. There are demonstrably problems in other areas in the country, even with this general election. And it's a shame that that's happening, but that's where it is. And so I appreciate Cindy's work on the statistics. That's really good and really appreciated. But there are indications of at least past. There's issues which have raised eyebrows in this county in past elections, and I think they ought to be addressed at some time. And it has to do with these graphs here. We don't have time to talk about it, but there are some big holes. There are some big holes in our elections, and it has to do with the legislative process. There is an internet connection down in that election room, and it's no secret. Everyone knows it, those people who work with it, and that's the Agilus machine. And if I had more than 2 seconds, I'd love to tell you the big hole that I think we still have and needs to be addressed legislatively on the state level, really. So maybe another time.
Thanks, Vince. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none?
Are there any online? None? Okay.
No, there's no other. Lisa?
Thank you for recognizing me. Lisa Shepard, Utah County, Provo. I just wanted to say a couple years ago, I stood here, and I'm going to say the same thing that I said a couple years ago, that our election process here is incredible. Our people work really, really hard. I've had that opportunity over probably the last 4 clerks to observe the systems and to observe the processes, and I'm thoroughly impressed with what they do there. And all the old things that they've done, the new things they've incorporated. And I really honestly have had such great opportunity with Commissioner Sakovich and Commissioner Lee, was even down there at the same time, to be able to go in and to pull a box and be able to perform the audits as, standing there with the Board of Canvassers. And I appreciate that. And I can put my test next to it of everything that I've seen is definitely, I have said in the past, world class. I will say it's exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Public comments? Yes, sir.
Sure. Why not, huh? Am I doing it right? All right, cool.
It's your name for the record.
Right, yep, Tony Lair, resident of Payson, but also a employee of Utah County, specifically in the elections division. And I would just like to say that I appreciate the support. I appreciate what I hear from the board, but also I think that in just the last few years that I've been working here, I have just been so impressed by the professionalism, the dedication, and the sacrifice of those fine folks back there, and all the volunteers who couldn't be here today. But I I want to extend my gratitude as a citizen of Utah County to them, that I just really appreciate all of their hard work and dedication, and that I see it. So, thank you.
Thank you
you.
very much. Any other comments? And none online still, Aline? Then seeing none, I have a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.